With nearly all our collective focus on coronavirus, a lot has been pushed to the back burner. But there's some non-COVID stories we can't afford to let fly by, like the Department of Justice dropping its case against former White House National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn, the man who pled guilty twice to lying to the FBI in a 2017 interview about his communications with the Russian ambassador. Still, a DOJ lawyer declared last week, quote, "The evidence is insufficient to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt." The motion to dismiss argued the DOJ now does not believe the FBI's handling of Flynn's case, quote, "was conducted with a legitimate investigative basis and therefore does not believe Mr. Flynn's statements were material, even if untrue." But yesterday, the former FBI agent who conducted the interview in question spoke out with a very different story in a New York Times op-ed, claiming Attorney General Bill Barr twisted her words to drop the case and that the interview was constitutional, lawful, and legitimate. Nearly 2,000 other former DOJ employees agree with that assessment, writing in an open letter today that Barr has once again assaulted the rule of law and calling on him to resign. I'm joined now by retired federal judge Nancy Gertner. Judge, it is good to see you as always.
It's good to see anyone.
Speaking of seeing, in your years on the bench, have you ever seen anything to rival the DOJ move here?
I've seen the DOJ dismiss cases, but not after someone has pled guilty to them twice, and essentially repudiating the very basis of the interview, repudiating the entire prosecution from soup to nuts. So no, I'd never seen that before.
So I read what their avowed rationale was in their pleadings the other day. Could you translate them into English for me and then give me your opinion on them?
I can't translate them into English because they're not English. Essentially, what they're saying is this was not material. What he was the lies were not material, and they were not material because they were connected to a counterintelligence investigation against Flynn, which they were in the process of dropping. But the problem is they were not just connected to the counterintelligence investigation of Flynn. They were connected to the Russian investigation. Flynn, if you recall, had met with the Russian ambassador in Trump Tower. Flynn, if you recall, had been on Russian TV. Flynn, if you recall, had worked to, I think, set up a back channel through the Soviet embassy for the purpose of communicating. There was plenty of reason to be concerned. And when Flynn then decided to lie about the calls to the Russian ambassador, to the press, to the vice president, there was plenty of reason to question him.
By the way, somebody agreed with you, at least at the time. Here's a tweet from the President of the United States on December 2nd of 2017. "I had to fire General Flynn because he lied to the Vice President and the FBI. He has pled guilty to those lies. It's a shame because his actions during the transition were lawful. There was nothing to hide." I mean, I assume objective observers, assuming there are any left in this country, would say this is Roger Stone 2.0. Donald Trump was upset with the sentencing recommendations in that case. So lo and behold, poof, they're changed after the 4 lawyers on the case resign. Here, 1 lawyer from the Justice Department resigns, and lo and behold, they're dismissing this thing. I mean, that's what this is all about, is it not?
If he wanted to be honest, the motion would have said, I don't believe in the Russian investigation. I think it's a witch hunt. And therefore, any prosecutions in connection with it, even prosecutions to lying to the FBI, which sort of stands as a separate prosecution, any of that has to go. We don't do that in this country. We don't do that in this country.
There's a big debate, I'm sure you've seen in the media, and I'm sure in your judicial and former judicial colleagues, is what power the judge has to reject, should he choose, this motion by the Justice Department. What power does he have, Judge?
Well, he has the power to reject it. It is rarely done. The motion to dismiss has to be done with leave of court. Usually that's a concern that the prosecutor will drop charges and then try to re-prosecute someone to harass them. This is the reverse of that. But he could certainly investigate whether or not there were political influences that were improperly brought to bear, who made the decision, what were the circumstances of the decision. We're in uncharted territory because you rarely have a Department of Justice that is behaving as preposterously as this one is.
Based on what you know, had you been the judge in this case, would you have overruled the prosecutor's motion?
I don't know. I would certainly have held a hearing, and I would bet that that's what Judge Sullivan does.
Go ahead.
They bring Barr into the courtroom, talk about, the president sometime at the end of April was suggesting that he maybe wouldn't have to pardon Flynn. What did the president know, and when did he know it? Well, who put their thumb on the scale here? That would be the inquiry.
So speaking of inquiry, I have another one for you. My understanding is that the Flynn was granted immunity for his other alleged crimes in return for his guilty plea. So if his guilty plea is withdrawn and the judge withdrawn or the case is dismissed, common sense would suggest that the immunity for the other crimes disappears too, and they could be prosecuted. Is that fanciful?
No, he could be prosecuted for that, but he'd have to be prosecuted by this Department of Justice, which has shown that not interested in prosecuting him. In addition, his son was not prosecuted for failure to register as a foreign agent, so his son could be prosecuted now as well.
Nancy Gertner, I read a quote from you in the L.A. Times, I don't know where it was, somewhere in the L.A. Times, I think, in the last day or two, in which you said one of the things that concerns you about this is not just the implications in the case itself, but the potential implications for other cases where people have either pled guilty or been convicted of lying to the government. What's your point there?
My point is that if the standards that Barr used in this memo were applied to other cases across the country, they would all be thrown out. I mean, there's literally a line in the memo that says that Flynn, a former intelligence officer, may have had faulty memory. There isn't a defendant in the country who has ever gotten away with fault. Whoops. When I was talking to Pence and the press and the FBI, I forgot that I had gone out of my way to talk to Kislyak. I mean, it would be funny if it weren't so sad. So the point is, the notion of, there has to be, this is not a material lie because it has to be connected to a legitimate ongoing investigation and be able to make a difference in that investigation. I can't tell you the numbers of people from one end of the country to the other whose lies have been prosecuted by this Department of Justice under circumstances that would have made no sense. In fact, I mean, defense lawyers all across the country are saying, oh, is that right? Is that the standard? That's the point here. I mean, it's not just the fact of moving to dismiss the case against Flynn. It's creating a body of excuses that apply only to the president's cronies. And that's the issue.
Nancy Gertner, good to see you. Thanks so much for your time. Stay safe.
Take care.
See you.